Good afternoon, everybody. I am calling to order the meeting of the council. Before we begin, let me introduce our new member, and that's Amy Bianco, who is Secretary Welsh's representative. And let me see if I get your title right. It's going to come Senior Director for Health Policy and Initiatives. No, Innovation.
That was perfect. That was perfect. Thanks so much, Faye. Wonderful to see everyone and to meet those of you who I've not met. As Faye said, I'm Amy Bianco, Senior Director of Health Policy. We'll leave the title there. The rest of it's kind of a mouthful. And here as Secretary Welsh's designee. So excited to be part of this group.
Welcome, welcome. It's really actually a very nice group. Let's see, what do we want to do first? Before we get to the minutes, I want to thank you first for coming and to say, I think at the end, I'm going to ask for us to have a conversation about whether or not we want to be in Zoom or whether we want to be in person. I will get to the agenda in a second, but you might have noticed that we reordered the more traditional agenda. And we're going to start with the strategic plan. Lauren mentioned that at our last meeting. And she thought that by covering it first, we'd have a good context for the discussion to follow about the traditional topics and the updates. And I thought that was a terrific suggestion. So we're going to start there. And then we'll get into the updates and responses to the conversation in March and any other new topics. So first, the approval of the minutes. They were mailed to all of you. Welcome, David. We're into the minutes. They were mailed to all of you, so I assume you all have had a chance to read them. Is there any discussion?
Just to note, Faye, I will abstain as I was not at the last meeting.
Actually, the trouble with being on student council 100 years ago, you are actually allowed to vote in the minutes. You don't have to.
All right.
But I only remember it because in 9th grade, this was a big issue at one meeting. And I became the Robert's Rules of Order person. So you are allowed to participate in the discussion and to approve the minutes, but we will not ask you in the roll call. Okay, so no discussion. Let me do the roll call. Sandra.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Sandra.
I will abstain since I wasn't here.
Right, guys. Niels.
Yes.
Laura.
Yes.
Brent.
Yes.
Bill.
Yes.
Amy, no, and yes. Okay. So approved. I will then turn it over for a discussion of the strategic plan. And thank you very much for doing it. I think it's terrific to have this conversation.
Great. Thank you, Faye. And so nice to see all of you. With some of the new faces, although Amy Bianco is certainly not a new face to many. She's new in her official role as designee for Secretary Walsh. So it's nice to see you again. So as Faye had mentioned, first I wanted to say thank you to all of you that were able to provide input and feedback in advance to help facilitate today's discussion. If you were not able to send out anything over, no worries. We want to make sure that this is an opportunity for any comments, feedback, and really your input. And this is really in line with the council's role, the statutory role in advising CHIA on our analytic agenda, data governance, and operating budget. So we wanted to make sure the council had this opportunity to weigh in and inform the strategic plan. But before diving into the discussion, I wanted to provide a brief recap particularly for those members that were not here at the March meeting, just to sort of provide an overview of what the strategic plan is, what it's not, and a brief overview of our process. So when I first arrived, it quickly became clear that with a lot of incoming demands and requests, that a strategic plan was really critical to inform and guide CHIA's work, how we prioritize our work, make decisions, allocate resources over a 12 to 18 month period. Now we expect this to be fluid, and so 12 to 18 months from now, we expect to evolve and use this as sort of a jumping off point and launch point to amend and evolve our strategic plan to align with the issues of the day and where we feel like our resources and focus really needs to be. So this is very much a moving document, but wanted to just note that at the outset, because this is not a wholesale restructuring document. This is not intended to sort of lay the groundwork for sort of real substantive changes. It's really just a collective articulation of our focus and where we should be spending resources and how we should be making decisions. So we engaged at the outset, we engaged HMA to help support this effort and have developed the document that we'd circulated a couple of weeks ago, again, for your review and for discussion today. In parallel, we engaged in an agency-wide effort to develop the specific tactics for each objective those will really serve as our operating plan for implementation. So those are more concrete, specific action items that we plan to take in order to implement and effectuate all of the objectives that were laid out underneath all the goals. So once finalized, we will use that operating plan to establish milestones and metrics against which to evaluate progress every 6 months. And we will be sure to use that 6-month interval period to update the council in terms of our progress. For next steps after this meeting, we will plan to share this document with key stakeholders, specifically our assessees, payers, providers, just to ensure that we are aligned with their vision and to validate the areas of focus that we've articulated in this plan. Once we've had those conversations, we will take the collective feedback and we'll share a final version of the plan to provide you all with both, again, the strategic plan document that you saw, inclusive of the tactics, and then we will plan to update on our progress at the December meeting, which will represent the 6-month period. So with that background, I want to dive right into the document, and instead of going line by line, looking at each objective, I really want the focus of the discussion to be on the council's feedback, which we've tried to summarize in comments throughout. So with that, I will ask Alex. Thank you, Alex. Before we dive in, I just want to check to see if there's any questions in terms of the background or context. Please feel free to jump in because I can't see everybody.
I do have a question.
Sure.
I may have missed it, but what's the duration of this plan? Is it 1 year? Is it, I don't think I found that, but I may have missed it.
Sure. So we had defined it as 12 to 18 months. And the reason being is that we felt like it was important, given, especially right out of the gates in January, a lot of the requests and demands that were coming in. And so rather than taking sort of a 12-month planning process, which we know that some of these engagements can typically take, we decided to do an abbreviated one. We're building off of some of the strategic planning work that had been previously done, but really to coalesce around what are the key priorities, which I think that for the most part, we had a good grasp on, and it just became a matter of how do we define the goals and objectives that in alignment with those key priority areas, but how do we define those goals and objectives in a way that is tangible and that we can actually implement. So we are thinking about 12 to 18 months is the defined scope. Again, with an opportunity to evaluate every 6 months. And as we hit that 18-month period, we will look to sort of evolve and modify the plan for the out years, for the future years.
It's really helpful because I think we all come into a strategic planning exercise with our own brand of what strategic planning looks like, or our own set of experiences or perspectives. And so another just overarching question for me would be, is there an associated companion operational plan that accompanies this, or is this sort of a strategic / operational plan? And I'm asking because my experience is that I see those two differently, but from your description of this particular plan, I'm feeling like this one is moves a bit more in the operational direction when it comes to distillation of priorities and understanding where areas of focus are. So will there be a companion operating plan, or is this sort of a one and the same?
Sure. No, I think it's a good question. And there were a number of comments to this effect and questions that we've outlined here. So I think it's good raising at the outset.
Okay.
As candidly, as somebody that is new to a strategic plan process, I would categorize this as, in some ways, as a hybrid, in that the key priorities, the goals are aspirational, and they are reflective of sort of the direction that we want to go. But as each level of the plan, the goals, objectives, tactics, get more granular and specific. And so they once we've gotten down to the tactic, which we do have a synthesized list based on an exercise that we had all of the teams do here at the agency. So it was really an opportunity for the whole agency to get involved and really get bought into the plan direction that we plan to go. And so the tactics do represent more actionable initiatives and steps that we will be able to evaluate, say, come December, or come 12 to 18 months from now, to say, yes, did we achieve this? Did we increase this number by X period of time? So those tactics will have timelines, owners, executive owners responsible, and milestones that we will be able to evaluate the progress, as well as ultimately implementation. So
Yeah,
I don't know if that answers your question, but I guess the way that you framed it, which was very helpful, distinguishing between strategic plan versus operating plan, I do view this in some ways with the tactics, that next level of detail that was not included in the document that we sent you, because again, we are doing that exercise in parallel. That component of it will probably look more akin to an operating plan.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that I just heard the best of both worlds, because what my biggest fear when someone establishes a strategic plan is that I've seen organizations develop those, and then their operating plan reflects nothing about what they said they were going to do strategically. There's no funding, there's no foundation for it. And to me, that's the scenario. And this being built upon, extrapolated from, and maybe being the driving the pylons down in terms of the details of tactics, it sounds to me very much like the strategic plan is going to be supported by operational action. And that was really the genesis of my question here, is that, yeah, so this sounds great.
Any other questions on just sort of the table setting?
So to make sure that the council members know what you were asking, because to be honest, all of us could probably spend the next 2 hours on this page with our opinions and suggestions based on our own experiences. I think you're asking for general input, and then we'll summarize at the end.
Yes. And I think that I wanted this opportunity to go through, because I think that a lot of the comments and feedback were really valuable, and I think it would be helpful to sort of share our intent behind some of the language, because some of the goals and objectives, I will say, we spent hours wordsmithing the structure, and there was a lot of intentionality behind the crafting, and so we are very much open to feedback and how we should be thinking about things differently. But yes, thank you, Faye, for sort of noting at the outset that the plan is not to necessarily wordsmith here the plan today, but I think conceptually it will be helpful to hear for us, the key themes and sort of the conceptual areas of feedback for us to take back and consider in any revisions that we make to the plan.
Terrific, because I think I saw the overarching feedback as that differentiation between operating and vision and strategy. So that was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So we can certainly create a vision statement. I think in this exercise, we tried to spend less time on the mission statement and really focus our time and energy on the goals and objectives, which then cascaded into the set of tactics.
Because again, as a board, what we do is give input. You don't have, if somebody says, this is what we suggest, doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it. This is a conversation. Great. Thank you, Lauren.
And I know that, Laura, you had noted for the goals, making them more aspirational. And so would welcome your specific feedback in terms of, as we go through each of the goals, on areas where you think that where we could be more aspiring.
Happy to do that, but also taking into note that this is going to be a combination, sort of this has to provide clear direction, and sometimes the aspirational can be a little too fuzzy. So happy to offer up those comments, and then again, if they're useful, use them. If they're not, no problem.
Sure.
Exactly.
And Lauren, just one other thing on this page before you leave it. You might just want to even reframe the title. So maybe it's the 23/2024 strategic plan, or it's the strategic and related operating plan, or something just to put the kind of boundaries around it that exactly we're talking about. I realized as I went through it that it was really both a strategic and operating plan together. That's how I internalized the document after going through it. I think we all got to that same conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So you might just want to modify the title either with a date or more descriptive.
Okay.
In that regard, just to make it clear.
Yep. No, that's helpful. And so I think a lot of the feedback we received around an evaluation plan and metrics to measure progress and success, I think those will be part of the tactics. And again, we're mapping the set of tactics that we've developed from the objectives to clearly define what is the sort of measure of success, who is the owner, and the timeline by which it needs to be completed. So that will come sort of as part of this package, but the first time that we will have the opportunity to sort of go through the tactics and look at a measure of progress on each of them will be the December board meeting.
That's great.
All right. Any other questions just at the outset? Okay. Alex, wouldn't mind advancing the next slide. So I think that, there was two comments with respect to the mission statement. One, is there an opportunity to make it more succinct, which I very much appreciate. And I think that the suggested language for us to consider certainly does get to the heart of the mission of CHIA, which is creating more transparency through our data, our information, and the analysis of which. So we can certainly take that back. There was a question about the use of the language around unique analytic resources, and I think that was intended to sort of call out that we are in a unique position. We do have a set of data here that the breadth of which is unmatched by any other agency. And so I think it was more just a nod to the unique position that we are in, having all of these data sets under one roof to help with just to support both policymaking, but really just in general to support our mission. So I don't know that there was science behind the term unique, but rather just an acknowledgement that we are uniquely positioned given the various data source sets that are housed within CHIA.
Lauren, one other comment. I love the more succinct version of this mission statement, and again, there's no formula to any of this, but I think the approach of saying, to do blank through blank for blank. And so the only thing that I thought was missing for me was the like for at the end of that. So maybe like for internal and external stakeholders or something like that. Just so, maybe that's not the best way of saying it, but I might add those words to the more succinct version, but I love the more succinct version, but think it might be helpful to consider, for internal and external stakeholders.
So I guess I agree that I like the more succinct version, but I was thinking the for was with respect to we do all these things in order to create that more transparent healthcare system. So I don't know if that is sort of in line with the way that you're thinking about the for.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, one interpretation of the succinct version is that the for is kind of already included. The distinction I was trying to draw out is that as an agency, you serve, internal other departments and agencies and groups, but you also serve external stakeholders with their information requests. And I've always felt like that could be an even larger part of what the agency does. So that was what was behind kind of my thinking with respect to trying to incorporate both internal and external.
I see. So you're talking about the for in terms of actually expressly calling out the audiences, if you will. Calling
out the audiences, exactly.
Okay. Nope, that's helpful.
Again, just my 2 cents on that.
Okay. Nope, that's
And it's so easy to get wrapped into this. I love this bill. My interpretation was it's for the people that live in this state. That's who ultimately we're doing this for.
Also fair. Yep, a good comment.
Yep. And I think we
won't wordsmith it, but we all like short. That's what I'm hearing.
And I think that some of the nuances that we're calling out here will come up in some of the later goals as we think about one of our goals and objectives is to expand sort of the use case and sort of audience for which, or I shouldn't say audience is not the right term, but the stakeholders and data requesters that we are contemplating expanding data release to. So we can come back to this, what I think is a really important point, and that I would love to get your feedback on.
Okay. But thank you for writing a statement. For those of us that sometimes are asked to define what CHIA is, it's really nice to be able to go bing, 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 and know that nobody's going to disagree.
I think it's a fair.
Thank you for working on it.
Yes, no, we will certainly take it back and try to streamline it. All right.
Lauren, just one other suggestion that may kind of wrap in that for element. You could consider keeping the effective word or concept in the shortened version, right? Speaking to not just the transparency, but kind of the ultimate goal of creating a more effective healthcare system. And that could be as simple as to create a more transparent and effective healthcare system in Massachusetts. I think kind of embedding the sort of broad desired audience and beneficiaries of the work.
Yeah. I think that's fair. So we will take that back and play around with this language and consistent with some of this feedback.
Great.
All right. Just in the interest of time, I want to keep us moving. So Alex, if you wouldn't mind, thank you. So I think this is pretty straightforward. We wanted to just lay out what are our core values. These are really the tenets that govern the way in which we do work, that govern our work product. Brent, I will say that I got a good chuckle at your suggestion because we too here have the same struggle of let's keep these. Are they verbs? Are they nouns? Are they adjectives? So you were not alone. We will. I like the way that you've laid it out to make them more consistent. So we will go back to, I think, where we started, which is consistent with how you've laid it out here. So thank you for that.
But it sounded like you had agreement on the values,
Yes, with the
which is good.
substantive, yes.
I think everybody agreed. Great.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I think on this one, there was a question about the intent and whether public service centered, the current framing limited the use of data or limited sort of the stakeholders, audience, data release requesters. And I think the short answer is no, that was not the intent. I think we had started out with I think wording something along the lines of customer service centric, or something to really reflect that a core sort of tenant in our day-to-day operations is to be responsive, to be creative problem solvers, to find a way to get to yes when there's an ask around certain data. Again, serving that ultimate mission and goal. And so we landed on public service centered, and I would say it's less about the public service sector, but more around how do we service the public, those that are requesting the data. With sort of highlighting and noting that our sister agencies, the legislature, policymakers are our priority stakeholders, but they are certainly not the only stakeholders that we serve. So just want to pause, see any questions on this value. Okay, hearing none. Great, thank you. So I think this is fairly straightforward in terms of thinking about our data governance, that we are accountable, that we need to put a premium on data security, accountability, integrity, both in how we secure our data and maintain our data, but also integrity in the data that we put out and the analysis that we put out. I think that there was a suggestion to more explicitly call out data governance and security. And so that's, I think, the point well taken, and we can certainly work that into the language we have here. Any question? All right. Thank you. So this one, again, I think fairly straightforward. And I don't think we've received any feedback or comments on this core value. Again, this is just around collaborating and being good partners with both sister agencies, policymakers, the legislature, but also thinking about, are there other stakeholders and partnership opportunities out there that we should be pursuing in order to enrich in our data, enrich in the analysis that we put out. So I think we are trying to actively think about other partnerships that we can forge, again, to achieve our broader goals.
Lauren, just a little question about, I use stakeholders constantly, that term. And my understanding is that Native American population, there's some history there. And I think it would be, I'm finding it very hard to root out my use of the word stakeholder. But I just want to flag that a little bit, because I'm running into it at the National Academy of Medicine with various people now returning comments to me, citing this sensitivity, particularly from the Native American population. So I just want to pull that out. And when there's a way that we can use a different word, I'm trying to use different words now, just out of respect for that. It's not widespread, but it's growing.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. I had not heard that. You learn something new every day.
What's the
And-
alternative?
Participants, those with whom we engage, I mean, they're not easy, which is why it's very hard, because it's hard to just switch out. When participant sounds to me like somebody attending a conference. It's not what I mean when I talk about the stakeholders. So we're working as a group now. It's not a big deal, but we're putting some thought to what word do we want to use that really represents those with a vested interest in this, those for whom this is meaningful or has an effect or impact on them. So you can see everyone stretches out into a phrase, and it's not an easy word. So we're struggling a little bit. And I don't have an answer to that one.
That'd be great. Let me know, because I think it's important. Thank you. I didn't know.
Yeah, no, that's
But I immediately went to, what do I say instead?
Yeah.
Because I'm going to use it in the presentation.
Yes, no, that's a good flag, and we will go back to see if there's a more sort of appropriate term to capture the same intent, but with a more sensitive terminology. Right. Alex, I think if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next one.
Absolutely.
Great. So innovative and agile, again, this is to really sort of capture a common theme that came up in our conversations around how do we be more proactive in terms of not only identifying sort of emerging issues and areas that we need to be thinking about and being one step ahead of, so that we're being less reactive, but more proactive and strategic about identifying these issues and coming up with solutions and sort of really data solutions to address the emerging issues. But also there was a level of having some level of agility, so that we know that things change, we know that priorities change, we know that the various sort of the nuances of some of these issues can change over time. And so we want to make sure that we are being nimble and agile to be responsive in our data solutions and how we think about our analysis.
And Lauren, my one thought here, and this doesn't have to be obviously the wording that you go with, but one thought might be in the first sentence of that second paragraph, to continually educate ourselves and I might suggest and responsibly apply innovative technologies.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because I don't think techniques, at least for me, didn't quite capture it. But I happen to like the word I like responsibly apply innovative technologies, because it kind of encompasses everything from AI, right through to a whole host of other things. So just a thought for you to consider.
Nope, I think that is a point well taken. I think we did reflect that comment on a later slide, but I think it's appropriate here as well. And I also think that it's the point well taken about updating not only the changing healthcare landscape, but also the changing technology landscape, which I think
that was my key comment, was that the healthcare landscape does change quickly, but the thing that kind of usually changes fast is the technology that we have to work with too. And so it's always good you kind of have to step with the technology or you sort of fall behind.
Yeah. And I'd argue it probably changes faster than the healthcare landscape.
Right.
Yes, definitely.
Just a little bit.
Especially AI, for sure.
Yeah.
And building off those points as well, I think the other thing that came to mind in kind of using the word innovative here is not only the techniques and the technology, but also the analyses as well. And I think this is reflected on slides moving forward, but kind of constantly thinking about the point of usability and accessibility to really think about, given the changing healthcare landscape, is the way in which the data is presented, gathered, synthesized, analyzed, is that a way that is usable and accessible to the public? So perhaps if we are using the word innovative here as well, if there's a way to capture that usability and accessibility piece that might change with the landscape.
Yep, no, that's fair. And I think very much sort of is captured in our goal number 2 is trying to get at that notion of how do we how do we continue to evolve and improve the way that we put out information with some of these new technologies available to us, but also based on evolving user needs. All right. No other comments here. Mind going to the last value. So I think, again, this value is fairly straightforward. I think it is intended to capture, but I appreciate the feedback because I think that we are, as written, it's really more focused on our sort of internal facing value in terms of how we govern as a workplace, as an employer, which I think is part of it, but really I'm thinking about this in a twofold way. One is, how do we operate as an employer? What is our workforce, ensuring that we have diversity, inclusion, and are fostering diversity and inclusion in our workplace, but also the second part of it is really about also acknowledging and capturing it in the work product that we put out. So I appreciate that this call out. We probably do need to sort of emphasize the second prong of this, which is both in our workplace, but also our work product.
When I made the comment, I was thinking it could be, and operationally it's going to be done. Those are different things, right? But I think that they both fall under the same. I think it's, as a data driven sort of organization, that the sort of the bias around data collection and analysis and so forth is like a super important thing to have in mind all the time.
Yeah. Absolutely. Any other comments? All right. Wouldn't mind going to the next slide. I think we get into our key priorities. And just to sort of call out or provided some context, these are areas that I think we at CHIA are saying is our general areas of focus. It is not to say that if something is not included on this list that we wouldn't be able to do it. But these are things that sort of current given state, given budget resources, these are the areas that we are sort of and will prioritize over, say, if there's an interest in rare international diseases, let's just for sake of illustrative purposes. It's not to say that we couldn't collect data and run analytics on foreign international diseases, but we would have to evaluate over some of these other areas where we are placing a premium, and or we may have to say, okay, yes, we can look into rare foreign diseases, but this would require an additional budget resources or additional, an increase to our general appropriation. So again, I just want to sort of emphasize that this is not supposed to represent an exhaustive list of the things that CHIA is working on, but rather these are the areas that we are and will be putting a premium on if and when we get to the point where we're having to make prioritization and trade-off decisions. I also want to just sort of clarify the intent, because the first bullet, core services, was one that we struggled with in terms of the language to use. But I think at the end of the day, what this comes down to is these are, or what was contemplated here, were the statutorily required activities and initiatives. So these are sort of what we're calling core services, but we can clarify to note that what's intended here is really the statutorily prescribed activities and deliverables. set forth. The other question, or feedback question is around ordering, and I will say that there's not any magic to the way that they were ordered. But I think there was a recommendation to lift up the last 3 priority areas, so that we can certainly do if we feel like that's important from a optics or messaging standpoint.
Lauren, just one thought. It gets hard, obviously, to start to list, bullet points, because whenever I see a list, I'm always compelled on the front end to say, including but not limited to the following, just so people don't think it's exhaustive. But when I think of kind of some of the most important words here, it's access, equity, quality, outcomes. They're you can keep going, but it's at least those 4 words. And access is certainly there. Equity is there. I didn't see quality, and I didn't see outcomes. And so again, maybe those get listed. This is not intended to be exhaustive. So, I'm back to my including but not limited to, but just wanted to put those four words out there.
No, I think that is fair. And I would say that for one, I personally had contemplated those, at least the quality piece in the first bullet when talking about healthcare system performance, but the first 2 bullets in some ways are overlapping because access and portability are 2 sort of essential components of the healthcare system performance mandate that CHIA is set out to measure and monitor. So we can think about whether we want to include an exhaustive list or how we want to better frame it so that we're not inadvertently suggesting that we're excluding certain things or not focusing on some of those core elements that, again, are very expressly called out in our statute.
So I want to pause on this because I think this actually is an important slide that's used, because you're going to get inundated, and I'm sure already do every year, every day, with a gazillion requests, all of which are the most important thing to the person asking. And I think it's helpful for CHIA to have a sense of priorities, and you can't be all things to all people. But for the 12 to 18 months, it's fair to say these are our priority life changes. Yes, you could add something. So as you think about it, it is a tool for all of us to say, this is the priority, and you have to get certain things done because you just have to get these reports out. I think you're right about accessibility, affordability. We don't want to, and then you have to respond to government agencies. And you have the following 3 as required this year. We've already committed to. So I think not for discussion as much as, but any other input from the council, it's an important slide that can be used over the next 12 to 18 months as you figure out what I used to call the wicked few are this year. Knowing that it will change in 12 to 18 months. I can promise you, if you're here 5 years from now, it'll be hopefully other than the statutory requirements.
Yeah, this is David. I think building off of that comment, Faye, I would almost kind of like separate out like the core things that CHIA is always going to be doing, and then the things that are the key priority areas for the next 12 to 18 months. And I think you could say, we're always going to do the core stuff. We're always going to respond to other government agencies. In the next 12 to 18, these topical areas are going to be where we're going to really, put additional resources and focus on. So one suggestion. Warren, I just a big broad question, just looking through these slides. There's no mention of like the healthcare cost growth benchmark. Like, what was the thinking of like not tying, CHIA's mission to kind of the broader state's cost containment and affordability agenda? Did that come up in your conversations?
It did, and I think that is a example that sort of fits. Well, we had all been sort of working under the assumption that it was included and captured in that core services So in talking about healthcare system performance, you're right that it's not called out, but I think that we were trying to, I think this has always been envisioned as an internal working document. And so what does it mean for, I think that when I think about the healthcare cost growth benchmark, that is more of a, in some ways, a relevant to sort of call out and specify for the external world versus the CHIA team as we're thinking about their work, on any given day. There's, as you're very well familiar with, the team that is charged with coming up with the annual report and measuring against the cost growth benchmark. But I think that is that team and that team's work, I think, falls pretty squarely within that core service bullet. So
I totally agree. I do think that there might be an opportunity to call out the fact that you have evolved, in this year's cost trend, in your cost trends report or your annual report, had some new novel ways of displaying the data based on kind of COVID impacts. And so, as I think about the next 12 to 18 months, I suspect that CHIA will continue to want to innovate in how you measure performance, given some of these disruptions. And so it is a little bit different than just push button, you have evolved and have been thinking about that. So
no, I think that's a fair point and a good flag. And I think that to me falls, perhaps could be an articulated tactic under or objective. I have to think about it a little bit more, but under either goal 2 or goal 4, as we think about how do we, one, display information and put information out there in a way that is sort of most responsible and appropriate, but it is also kind of falls in that bucket of number 4, which is how do we evolve with the times? How do we evolve our work product to be reflective of the current landscape? So I think that's a point well taken, and we will think about how to capture that, because you're right, we will continue to the best we can capture some of these nuances.
great, thank you.
Lauren, that you brought up an important point there, I think, about the audience for this document. Sometimes strategic plans, particularly for public agencies, are to let everyone else know what's going on. And I think I heard you say that this is an internal document for guidance. And I think that's material, just in thinking about, and in terms of the provision of feedback to you, is this posted publicly on the website? So it's not, okay, all right, thank you, very helpful.
So our plan is not to post this on the website. We are planning to process this with some of our, I'm going to say stakeholders, but for lack of a better word, until I find that good replacement, with the payers and really the assessees funding our operations, because I want to make sure that we are that they have an opportunity and hopefully to validate the areas of focus and our approach. But we would not necessarily post this as a public facing document, but we would refer back to it if for example we had some new sort of onerous request from the legislature, or you name it, stakeholder group or advocate group, to say, can you look into this? This is a big priority to us. There may be instances where we point back to our strategic plan and say, listen, this was developed with input and feedback from our Oversight Council, from the payers and providers, and this falls well outside of this strategic plan. And so we're open to doing it, but this would require XYZ resources, or this would happen on perhaps a delayed, more deferred timeline.
That makes sense, complete sense.
Any other questions on this slide? All right. So going to goal 1, I just wanted to note at the outset, because I think that we were trying to cover a lot with this goal, so admittedly, and so I do want to make sure that the objectives and some of the feedback, which I appreciate, around reducing bias in the data, are adequately captured here. So I would say the 3 primary things that this goal is trying to accomplish are sort of with the internal lens. It's how do we promote and create and sustain a culture of DEI within CHIA, the CHIA workplace. Also, sort of emphasizing this like one team, one CHIA approach, as we've been sort of using internally the term one CHIA, meaning we're all, yes, we have different business units and teams here, but we need to be so all working towards under one strategy, one unified approach, versus having work product sort of coming out from various teams. But how do we better integrate and coordinate our internal resources to come out to produce cohesive and unified work product? Because I think that leveraging the expertise and knowledge and data sets across the agency will yield a far better work product than having silos of teams and work product coming out there. So one is promoting DEI within the workplace among our staff. 2 is creating a more unified governance and decision-making structure. And 3 is really how do we foster that diversity, equity, inclusion value into our work product. And I think in a lot of ways that means how do we add that lens, that equity lens to all of the work that we do, all of the analysis and informatic work that we put out there. So it's trying to accomplish a lot. And I think we acknowledge that, but we felt like it was important because to the extent that we foster diversity, equity, inclusion within the workplace, I think that enriches our work product. So that is, I wanted to just spend a little bit extra time on this one because it is goal number 1 for a reason. And acknowledge though that this is in many ways an ambitious one but one that we are very much committed to.
I wanted to, I qualified my comment about the bias in the data piece, saying that because I got that, the focus that you're talking about, in terms of it being more of a staff and culture focused, which is super important. So I'm fine with not having anything about that here because it's focused on that specific aspect, which I think is good. So I don't want to dilute it with talking about that sort of, like you said, the other lens if it doesn't belong here. So
I mean, I think that it could be called out a little bit more though in objective 1.3, because I think that is sort of the gist of what 1.3 is intended to address, is how we take the workplace culture, one that fosters DEI, and really make sure that we're embedding that into our day-to-day work and our work products. So I think that there's an opportunity to weave that in a little bit more explicitly.
I would agree with that. And I think this makes, if that's kept that way and there's an opportunity to enhance it, makes it more consistent with the core value. And you go back and look at the core value for the diversity and equity and inclusion core value component. There are several places in there where there's a reference to work products or the things that are produced, or so would definitely want to see that there is a intent here to have it go beyond the staff to, it maybe wouldn't go as far as developing new work products, new products or services that would improve diversity, equity, and inclusion. It wouldn't necessarily have to go that far with it, but I think that it's important to maintain and include that piece that says we want it to go beyond the employee experience here or the culture of CHIA out into, and maybe it wanted to be reflected in the work that we produce.
Yeah, yeah.
With regard to the aspirational aspect of this, I realize that if this is a pure strategic plan, as I think about it as a pure strategic plan, and also factoring in that I have a flair for the dramatic, take this with a grain of salt. But I find that for me, generally, aspirational goals inspire me, and they cause me to sometimes go above and beyond or to think differently about objectives. So I think for this one, just an example of what might be an aspirational goal here would be to establish CHIA as a model of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, if you were maintaining just the workplace focus. If not, it might read something like establish CHIA as a champion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that we went as far in my organization as saying we wanted to be a magnet for those that wanted to work in an environment of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And just that sense that what that does is deepen that sense of commitment to this. And I think of my goals and objectives as a mini vision for each one of the goals and objectives. What is that vision for if we were to knock this out of the park, what would this look like? I also understand that CHIA needs to be buttoned up. That's the expectation. And so if this is a little too much, unicorns and rainbows, then, maybe it's not suited for CHIA, but a little bit of aspiration there. And I also think it creates a bit of a stretch. And I also my experience has been that my teams and I have always performed better when we had something out there to strive for that seemed a bit beyond our reach.
No, I think that's a really valid comment. And I think that given the import that I think that all of us in developing these goals and objectives felt around this goal in particular, I think that there is some opportunity to make it a little bit more aspirational, and I think the one piece that I just don't want to get lost is this other element of unification of the team. So it's great for this workplace that is not only diverse, equitable, and inclusive, but how do we find a way to better integrate our work in a more unified way and be really intentional about it.
Yeah, could also be that aspect could also be reinforced under the collaboration component.
Yeah. So we will play around with the words to and take some of your suggestive language. All right. Any other comments on goal 1? All right. Thank you, Alex. So goal 2, again, just to kind of go back to a comment I had made earlier, this was really around how do we, it's intended to be sort of external facing. So what information, what analytics, what work products that we are posting, disseminating, putting up as a dashboard, how do we ensure that it is not only clear, but is usable to and sort of fitting with the intended audience. I think one example of this is we put out a data narrative. I always get the terminology wrong, but we put out an accompanying piece with our annual report, similar to, I think it's the New York Times or Wall Street Journal that puts out the data storytelling. And we received a lot of really positive feedback putting it out there. We saw a lot of traffic, sort of click traffic. And so I think for me at least, the lesson from that was we need to be rethinking about the way in which we put information out there. Perhaps I think that there's actually a lot of opportunity to put it out in a more digestible, sort of user-friendly manner. And so this goal is really intended to say, yes, we've historically, perhaps by statute, put out sort of long, lengthy, dense reports. But maybe there's an opportunity to revisit who's for what purpose, for what audience, and for what use case, and using that to inform whether there's opportunities to revise and rethink the form in which we put some of this information and data out there.
Yeah, a couple of other words you might want to consider in addition to clear and usable. Totally recall. Insightful is one. Actionable is another. Always good to have words like that. I mean, particularly actionable, I think. Right. So that kind of encompasses, a broader set of attributes, and so consider words like that in this goal as well.
Okay.
That gets a thumbs up from David, so I know I'm onto something when I get a thumbs up from David.
Sort of an overall, sort of to that actionable sort of point, one of the comments I made around some of the data presentation goals is, also coming at it from the other side of, it's always a good idea to explain things in a way that's clear and, hopefully, I don't know if obvious is the right word, but to explain things clearly and in an accessible and sort of way that as many people as possible can sort of get and understand. There's also sort of from an actionable point of view, I think moving towards also, one of the things I really like about some of the CHIA reports is the sort of the data in the spreadsheet that's sort of included along with it, sort of the data workbook or however it's called, in order to sort of make it actionable and be able to actually take that data and do something with it, or to try to, the report didn't quite show it the way I wanted to. I want to, do something with it. And I think moving, even sort of trying to do that in even sort of like a more principled way, where we make sure that sort of like all of the data that's included in those types of reports is sort of in a companion sort of piece. And, I had mentioned some things around sort of the open reporting, open science kinds of things, where you actually like include I think this is more sort of aspirational and a longer term kind of thing, but being able to actually sort of include the calculations that were done with the reports, not for the general sort of viewer, but as a way of showing, here's how we produce this piece. And if you want to take that and extend it and do something with it yourself, you can do it. So I just wanted to get those ideas across. I know that this is like a 12 to 18 month kind of piece, but just having as a goal of, can people take the data that's being produced and also trust it, because you can sort of reproduce it yourself, and then also be able to use that to extend and do other things with that.
And Brent, not to summarize what you were saying in like 2 words, but trusted is a critical word. You just said transparent is, of course, a critical word, right, in what you just said as well.
Yeah, and I think that that is very much in line with some of the ways that we're thinking about broader data release reforms here at CHIA, which I think we get into more in the next slide. But I think that this is something we are considering, but I appreciate your sort of clear explanation and your framing. So I don't think that this is out of line, or it's certainly feasible within the next 12 to 18 months for us to be thinking about. So I would love to sort of follow up with you a little bit more, just to make sure that we're thinking about it in the same way, and would love your specific thoughts, because I know that we do put out data books for a lot of the reports that we do, but certainly would love to chat more about opportunities to make the data more transparent when we're putting out these publications.
That's great.
With regard to the sort of aspirational component of this one, I really like the goal itself to retain it. You know, with the conversation that we've had, I agree with the comments that have been made. So I wouldn't say this replaces this, but if we were to put sort of that overall kind of visioning statement here, would be establish CHIA as an indispensable resource to a broader range of users. And it's the notion of just becoming, they can't live without us. And they just, you know, if the CHIA wasn't there, I don't know what I would do.
The first place I look, always.
Yeah. First place I go, and you might end up, you know, I mean, but also include what Bill was mentioning as a trusted, indispensable resource. If we wanted to add that word trust, because I think that's increasingly important in our culture and climate.
Yeah, and I think I'm trying to, in my mind, I'm trying to think about how to make sure we are keeping goals 2 and 3 distinct and going back to kind of the core intent behind each of them. And so because I think that they're very much related, but I think that the intents are slightly different in that this one is really about the work product that we put out there. So how do we make sure that how are we rethinking about, maybe we don't put out that 100-page super dense report on, you know, you name it topic, but maybe we put it out in a dashboard, or maybe we put it out in a sort of interactive Tableau form. I think that there's just a lot of opportunity to rethink some of the ways that we've historically put information out there, because a lot of it is pretty dense, and we know that there's a lot of busy policymakers out there that aren't going to have time to go through 100 pages of CHIA information. And so how do we best tailor the work product and our deliverables to the intended audience and intended use case for them? And then which I think is a good, if there's no other questions on goal 2, I think a good segue to goal 3, which is in my mind more towards Alex, you wouldn't mind advancing to the next? Great, thank you. Which is more toward, I think, capture some of the comments that were just made around how do we continue to evolve our systems and data so that it's usable, whether it's the cost report platform, or whether it's the data sort of extracts that we're putting out there. How do we increase the usability of it, but also accessibility, so that you don't have to be some SQL whiz to be able to understand or dive into the data, but that we're tailoring it to the audiences that we want to make sure have access to this. So that's kind of the subtle distinction between goal 3 and goal 2. This is certainly more data set focused, and there were a number of really good comments. So I wanted to make sure that we took the time to go through some of these. Starting from the framing of the goal itself, using alternative to improve. That's less subjective. I believe this was your comment, and
well, unless I have a beginning and an end, it's hard to measure improve. Your improve may not be my idea of improvement.
Expand is another alternative.
Expand, that's more measurable.
It can also be clarified by the measurement when it's set. So here's what we mean by improve. Here's the metric for that.
Yeah. But I think it gets a little bit to what Laura was saying too, as I'm reading some of this is, you know, what is it? What do you want it to look like?
Right.
What if it really was usable and accessible?
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I think that expand is contemplated in this goal, but it is not the only. I think that we wanted to make sure that we were also capturing some of the for some of our more routine annual work that we do, for example, for Mass Health, providing support with rate setting, the cost report platform that, for example, nursing facilities are submitting cost reports into, and that some of those platforms and systems are not necessarily expanded, but are improved for user experience. And so I think improve was intended to include both improve the functionality, but also the accessibility with the end goal of expanding and increasing the audience and end users of the data. But I think we can make this a little bit more aspirational, and make sure that our objectives, which are intended to be more measurable than the goal itself, are reflective of that more aspirational goal. So we know, Brent, that we had talked about your comment around open data and reproducible research and reporting methods. So we can take that back and perhaps decide whether that's most appropriate as an objective or a tactic itself. And then another theme that came up from a number of the council members was around incorporating artificial intelligence technologies into the way that into our data sets, our analytics. And so I think that this is something that we have captured as a tactic, but can again take back and we think, is this more appropriate as an objective? Because we know that artificial intelligence, whether we want it or not, is here to stay. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. And so this is something that I think the tactic as written is something to the effect of doing an evaluation and providing a recommendation on the use of AI within, I forget what the time frame was. I won't publicly commit to the timeline that we had internally decided upon in the tactic, but within the less than a year, coming up with a recommendation on how we can incorporate AI into our data systems and analytics.
I think that's advisable. I like that because it also would give you an opportunity under the objectives to make it clear that the issues of responsible AI, that, the things that people are sort of up in arms about and actually fearful of right now, it would add some clarity to how exactly do you intend to use this, because we know it can break bad and we don't want it to. So I think it gives an opportunity to call that out and this is one of those where we'll be focusing on this in the next 18 months. It may not necessarily be a lifelong objective for CHIA, but certainly an area of focus for the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah. Agreed. Right. If there's no other comments, I don't want to rush through because I think this is all really important and really helpful feedback, but I am keeping an eye on the clock and knowing that we are over. Goal 4, I think, is around the notion of, as we had discussed before when going through the values, of being more proactive and being more sort of affirmative in terms of identifying issues and emerging topics that are relevant, and then again being proactive in identifying data solutions to support those efforts or challenges. So I think this is fairly straightforward. I'm just going through the comments here. Brent, I think that it was your suggestion, which I liked, which was kind of, if I understood it correctly, a standardized process to intake some of these ad hoc requests, which we know are frequent, and that is a role and very much an area that we've established as a priority for CHIA. We will continue to make resources available so that we can support those ad hoc one-off requests that are due yesterday into our workflows.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were done. Yeah, and this might be more of a tactical thing as opposed to sort of the goal and objective thing, but part of the idea too, and is that in addition to, and this is just from my experience, but just that it's often good also to, as you take, it's so important to handle those sort of ad hoc requests, which I think you're probably doing a great job of, but then also to sort of reflect on, like, is this something that is going to be asked for again, to sort of, keep an eye on that sort of pipeline and see if, and have sort of a process for turning those into more self-service types of things, or just like have that, think of that as a sort of like a backlog, or as a place to sort of look for efficiencies, because those ad hoc requests can be very time consuming, and if you think of ways of sort of turning those more into, if you're seeing a lot of a certain kind of thing. So it's just a process around, or sometimes it's just a mindset of like, instead of just processing each one of these, let's just think, step back and think if we can do some things around making this easier next time we have to deliver that type of thing.
Yeah. No, I think it makes sense. And I do know that we have some tactics that have elements of this. And so we will certainly, again, take this back and think through, is this better reflected as a tactic, or adding it as its own distinct objective?
And Brent, just to build upon your comments as well, as a representative of an agency who is often sending these ad hoc requests, I think there's probably a lot of intel that can be taken from those requests that have come in as well. Because I think oftentimes when these ad hoc requests come up, it's because the data just is not presented or gathered in a certain way that answers that specific question. And I think that perhaps there's a pattern there of kind of emergency like policy topics that one could look at to say, these are the things that are rising to the top of the barrel when we think about challenges, issues, questions, hypotheses, as we think about the transformation of our healthcare system. And so perhaps, I don't know if CHIA has a catalog of those requests that have come in, but perhaps there's some intel that could be used as we think about how do we take the existing data that we have and think about the way in which it is presented, gathered, and made public.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really, really good point. And we do have a catalog of the requests that come in, but I think one of the things that this exercise has made clear is that we do need to kind of round out our feedback loop in terms of taking this catalog, or taking stakeholder feedback, or taking sort of new and emerging issues that are rising to the top, to how do we make sure that all the right individuals here at CHIA are aware, and how do we think about data solutions, not just for that in response to that one request, but in a more systematic way. And so I think that there's definitely an opportunity there for improving for process improvement.
Yeah, Warren, we can take this offline, but we also get a lot of those ad hoc requests. And I think there's an opportunity for our two agencies to share that catalog, because I think we're oftentimes asked to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And so would love to work with you.
It's a race of who can just deliver it sooner. And whichever agency it is, it will then just become the agency that the requests return to. So I think you're right. I think it's definitely worth comparing notes and making sure that we're coordinated on that catalog. All right, and I think the last comment here, certainly not the least, is around the monitoring health system financial performance. And I think that this is something that has been identified as an evolving and emerging priority area. So again, whether we can take back whether this is its own objective or a tactic, sort of an acknowledgement that this is a potentially a tactic under 4.4, which is an emerging priority.
Lauren, just a quick question on the word monitor. Is the way that we can make that more predictive, so it's not just rear view,
Mhm.
but a little bit more forward looking.
Yes, and I don't want to speak for EHS, but I think I do know that it is predictive is consistent with, I think, part of the use case here, and thinking about how do we get one step ahead of financial issues or challenges with the
Exactly.
health system performance. So I think we can wordsmith that to incorporate, to say it's an and both, but it's monitoring, but also predicting and being able to really have the information be actionable, so that when there are issues, it's rising to the surface and actionable for the relevant agencies.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, good to forecast as well as look backwards.
It's also consistent with sort of the theme that I was thinking about for this, where it's important to adapt to changes that are going on. It's important to recognize new and emerging things, and the idea of becoming more anticipatory of the needs, even if we don't see a trend, but we know what we can start to feel that there's a need around this. No one's expressed it yet. That I think is a little harder to concretely document in something like this, or to strive for. But I think if there can be this sense too that in addition to reacting and adapting, getting out ahead, as you mentioned, I think I heard you, Lauren, just say something about getting out ahead a little bit, or what the prospective view is important to include here.
Yeah.
And just to echo that, Lauren, I think from EHS's perspective, being proactive is definitely something that I think would be helpful. Just to kind of use one example, I know that the CHIA hospital reports are incredibly helpful, but oftentimes are most useful when a financial problem in a particular system or hospital has arisen already. And therefore, I think knowing how many incredibly intelligent people we have in the Commonwealth who have really looked at this and put a lot of time and work and research into thinking about what are those financial performance indicators that we really should be looking at to help us be more predictive. I think that taking an opportunity to identify those metrics and utilizing that as our kind of roadmap as to how we think about our data and what we are kind of pulling out in terms of analyzing, so that we can look at this data in a proactive way versus a reactive way.
Yeah.
Lauren, I'm going to stop conversation at this point, if I can, and start by saying thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for you personally in the leadership in this. Thank you for your team, because this is a lot of work in 3 months that you're putting into this. And I know you've got all the reports and analysis and plans underneath, which is also terrific. Hard work and much appreciated and much needed. I also want to thank the council. People really spent time and effort reading this and providing Lauren with input. I thought our conversation was terrific. I think we really did a good job of keeping it fairly high level. Tempting though many of us are with either aspirational or wordsmithing or our own particular viewpoints, it was a really very good conversation. As I listened, I think there are 5 sort of key takeaways for Lauren, other than great wordsmithing ideas. One, I think, was definitely the clarity at the beginning between an operational plan, a strategic plan, and the time frame, because that's the context with which one should use to read this. In terms of mission statement, you heard loud and clear, wordsmith it, but keep it short, because that's all that many of us can remember. In terms of the core values, you didn't have any disagreement. You nailed the right ones. We can talk a little bit about how they were shaded but really terrific. In terms of the key priority areas, I think there was a lot of great discussion about how to make it clear, and particularly thinking about the core and the things that have to be done, and then the 12 to 18 month priorities. I think there's a sense that many of us will be using that as we think about either our own requests from you or how we can help you when you get inundated with requests. And I've expected most of the conversation was about goals. Again, a lot of great ideas in terms of wordsmithing, emphasis, conversations around them, and particularly maybe differentiating between 2 and 3, which I think you articulated very well, and how that comes into the conversation others were having, and then, focusing on the proactive, thinking ahead, getting a little bit ahead. As you build your team, I commend you for putting your team first. It takes a group to do this, and you need to have a terrific group to execute this plan. Sometimes planning looks easy compared to execution, and we all know that. Any other overall thoughts somebody would like to add before we move on to the other topics? Well done, really. And gives you context for the priority areas and why you put those 3 down, because they happen to be the 3 priority areas for the next year.
Yes, thank you, Faye, for that summation. And I think so as you said, the hard work is ahead in terms of actually putting this plan into practice. But really want to echo your thanks and gratitude to the council members for your thorough review and providing really thoughtful feedback and input for a great conversation. But there's more to come. If there's sort of additional lasting thoughts, please don't hesitate to reach out and share. And we will, once this is finalized and we've received feedback from payers, providers as well, we will be sure to circulate with the council, and we'll look forward to that 6-month progress update in December.
Agreed.
All right. So it's a good segue, as you noted, and I'm going to try to breeze through this a little bit quickly here, given the time. But going forward, we thought it would be helpful for each of these council agendas to include an update on the 3 topical priority areas that we've laid out for the next 12 to 18 months. So primary care and behavioral health, equity, and workforce. And with each meeting, we will do sort of one deep dive into one of them, in addition to the general ongoing update. So today's deep dive, we wanted to dig into the work we're doing on the primary care dashboard, especially as we are at a juncture where we're needing to develop the specs for the next iteration of the dashboard. So I will turn it over to Caitlin, and whose team is leading this work, and we'll kind of go through where we are. But I would just ask that if we can do a slightly abridged version, just for the sake of time, that would be much appreciated. So with that, Caitlin, do you want to take it away?
Absolutely. Thanks, Lauren. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. So Alex, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide. As Lauren said, my name is Caitlin Sullivan. I lead a team who's been working on this primary care dashboard in collaboration with Massachusetts Health Quality Partners. If you're not familiar with MHQP, they're a nonprofit here in Massachusetts that has long focused on primary care and quality measurement. So we partnered with them last fall and produced our first, what we're calling a primary care dashboard in January 2023. And the goal here was to provide sort of a comprehensive look at the primary care system in Massachusetts, looking across 4 domains of metrics. So those 4 domains are finance, which included measures on like how much we're spending on primary care, how much health plans are spending, how much patients are spending out of pocket. Performance, that includes quality measures, are folks getting the screenings that are indicated for certain populations, and underneath performance also includes access. Are folks able to access primary care or preventive care providers? The third domain, is capacity, and that really looks at the workforce challenges we're seeing in Massachusetts, in particular in primary care, sort of an aging workforce and a reduction in the number of medical school graduates going into the primary care specialties. And then finally, our 4th domain is equity, in which we take some of the quality and performance measures from the other domains and stratify those by race and ethnicity to see how some of these are experienced differently by different residents of the Commonwealth. So as I said, our first report came out in January 2023, and we're really looking to get some feedback from you all and others around the new metrics we're considering including. So Alex, if you can move to the next slide, please. I won't go through each of these, but you'll have these slides to refer back to. But these are the current measures in each of the domains that I kind of overviewed briefly in the top slide, really looking at spending, the workforce and capacity, quality measures, especially with respect to folks receiving preventative screenings and vaccinations, and then stratifying some of these other measures by race and ethnicity. So next slide, please, Alex. So looking beyond the metrics we included in the first cycle of the dashboard, we're looking to update this dashboard and publish it later this year. And so here are some of the metrics you can see in the left-hand column on this slide that we're considering including as sort of new metrics. So we're looking specifically at the percent of Massachusetts residents who reported having a PCP in our health insurance survey, the type of clinic where patients receive their usual source of care, the percentage of residents who are required to have a primary care provider by plan design. So that means folks in maybe an HMO type plan. And then a new area that we're focused on is really looking at that primary care behavioral health integration. There's some existing measures around this from patient experience surveys of the commercial, privately insured, as well as the mass health population. And then looking again at the capacity question, including some more information about community health workers in the primary care space. And then finally, using some data from the Board of Registration in Medicine from Borum on the PCPs who are reporting they're accepting new patients and the number of hours primary care providers are providing in actual clinical care per week. Next slide, please. So in addition to those new measures that we're considering, we're also going to add some new stratification. So for the first four on this slide, or really all of them, we're looking to kind of break out each of these metrics by adult and pediatrics. So we want to look at both primary care providers serving adults and primary care providers serving the pediatric population. And then we want to look at some of the questions of access and the challenges around obtaining necessary healthcare, stratified by region. I think this is one of our approaches to sort of bring in an equity lens to look at how different areas of the Commonwealth might experience these access issues differently based on, for example, the number of PCPs operating in the area, the types of provider organizations in different parts of our state. Next slide, please. So our next steps are, as I mentioned, kind of socializing this with our key, I'll say, partners and finalizing the metrics. We'll be working on compiling the data for this dashboard this fall and then publishing an updated version in the fall or early winter. Next slide, please. So what I'm really hoping to get from you folks in the few minutes we have today, and of course follow up afterwards, is do these sound like the right additional metrics to include? Are there other kind of domains or large topical areas we should look for either for inclusion this year or the next year? And then to the point in our kind of strategic planning exercise around making this data and the analysis really digestible and accessible. Our first dashboard was a very nice looking, very well designed PDF, but we're considering this year including a supplemental version that's interactive that'll allow users to kind of toggle between the different stratifiers that I mentioned. Does that sound sort of a good idea to you all? And then finally, the kind of one of the drivers behind the primary care dashboard, in addition to, we sort of had been hearing as we came out of the pandemic of all these challenges for primary care, and they've been well documented. And CHIA already had a lot of data and reporting in this space, but it wasn't published in a single destination that someone could go and get like a high level overview. And so we're looking to do the same thing for behavioral health. And, we'd appreciate any feedback you have on whether this approach makes sense for the behavioral health space or whether a different approach, is something you'd recommend. So I don't know how much time we have for discussion, but I'd love to hear any feedback you have now or again after the meeting and looking through materials and follow up.
Caitlin, just one quick comment. I think the thinking here is great. So really applaud it. I love interactive versions when they can be, when they can be made available. So for me, that's a big plus. Also love the idea of a behavioral health dashboard. So hugely in favor of that. Maybe the one thing that feels like it's missing to me is, a lot of the data seems to be based on kind of the traditional in-person visit approach. And I just wonder if telehealth shouldn't somehow be factored in here, and separately reported on, or at least to have a view as to how telehealth is being utilized, infused. Is it increasing access, as an example, and maybe, maybe there's a perspective that can be built upon relative to kind of quality and, of telehealth, maybe even outcomes. But it just strikes me that telehealth should be incorporated in this data gathering, including with respect to behavioral health.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. That's really good feedback. We do have some data on telehealth, both in some reports that we get directly from health plans and in our claims data. And I know our friends at the Health Policy Commission had a comprehensive report on telehealth that I think we could kind of collaborate on sort of additional analysis that we could do trending beyond kind of the when that report ended. I also think, in addition to telehealth is sort of a new area that we should be monitoring, we've also had some discussions around new types of delivery systems for primary care that are sort of like the standalone clinics, the minute clinic, and then
Definitely.
some of these like new entrants into the space that are telehealth specific, right? So those are areas we've considered including, but we're trying to sort of balance, having a comprehensive look with keeping it in a digestible format. But I think the telehealth feedback is a really, really good point. So thank you.
Yeah, my second comment was retail clinics. Again, just depending on how specific you want to get, right? Some number of people think of the retail clinic as having replaced the PCP.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Do we collect any of that anywhere? I mean,
so we'd have that in our claim. So to the extent that it's reimbursed by a health plan, it would be in our all payer claims database.
Because it's there and they're growing. At least as I look at the lines outside my CVS.
I think that's a great opportunity for us to use the claims data in a way to get some insight into changing dynamics and changing utilization patterns of how people access primary care. So that's really helpful feedback.
I was trying to use the based on the goals that were on in terms of showing the health of the primary care system as being, so how are we doing with respect to that sort of, I wanted to look further back. I thought it presented, 2019, 2020 data well, and I could look for the difference there, but I wanted to see longer trends. And I'm guessing that's because the data is not available, or in terms of being able to go further back in time and to see the longer term trends.
I think it was probably, some of it was the data was unavailable and some of it was space constraints and sort of our, like I mentioned before, trying to balance having a digestible dashboard. But the interactive version would really enable us to add additional years for look back that we've done with other dashboards we've produced on quality that you could look at 5-year trends or something like that, that I do think is, especially for primary care, really important, because there was certainly a major change during COVID, but it didn't start with COVID, right? So there's many of these issues that were happening pre-COVID that I think would be helpful to have when you look at baseline. So I think we can definitely consider that for the interactive component.
I think that'd be great. I think the interactivity would make it a lot more, useful in terms of just trying to understand, a larger. And some people, you might be interested in one part rather than the other. Getting a high level view of everything is good, but it's nice to be able to dive more deeply into a particular metric.
I'd send out a message saying if somebody has a point on this, feel free. We've got a minute or two left on this topic.
Just to add my voice of support for this project and for the great job you've done already, Caitlin, and on the first dashboard. Just to reflect with this group, this is a priority area for the Health Policy Commission as well. And we are kind of simultaneously this year going to be doing our own set of research into the trends and dynamics in the primary care space, taking a little bit more of a policy lens to that. And so I could see a great opportunity for these two pieces of work to align, towards the end of the year with a kind of a refreshed landscape. And then our work, which would be, well, what do we think about this? And do we need to change some of our policies to encourage a more high performing system? So I'll really look forward to working with you on that. There's just a lot going on in primary care, and we've talked a lot about them. And then there's the concierge primary care, which we can't see in our claims data, unfortunately, but is a trend as well. And a voice of support for interactive, maps, especially. I always hear from Worcester City of Health, Public Health, like Boston Public Health Commission. They want to see down to the zip code level in their city, what's going on. And so a great resource, great work.
Just one other quick question, Caitlin. I'm wondering did I miss it, or is it outside of the bounds to be looking at, and I don't know exactly how to get at this, but is there enough primary care available in the state? And that would include, yes, primary care doctors, whether they're accepting or not accepting. But I'm also noting a lot of my physician, for example, just went into concierge practice. And so is leaving the practice. And I just wonder if there's another way to get at whether people are feeling like they are not getting their primary care needs met, or if we might see, for example, a lessening of the number of available appointments for physicians, but that's okay because I'm going to CDS and I don't need it.
Thanks, Laura. That's a great point. And I think we have a couple metrics in there that speak to this around the number of primary care doctors leaving, but it doesn't leaving primary care, which doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to or they are going to concierge medicine. So I think that we can do some refinement around how we're monitoring that. As we'll talk about in a few minutes, we have our workforce survey that's in the field now that I think can maybe answer some of this. And then our survey of individuals and households that I think we've added some new questions on related to their experience with primary care and their access to primary care. So we're hopeful to sort of flesh that area out better in the next iteration as well. But thank you for that's really good feedback.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. Good moment to move on to then the update on the next two areas. Start with work or whichever, health equity or workforce.
Sure, thank you. So I'm going to try to squeeze in so much work, and so I by no means am I trying to sort of understate the amount of work that's been going on both on health equity but also workforce. CHIA had the opportunity to participate in the Health Equity Compact's Summit last week. I joined my colleague here, David Seltz, along with some of our other colleagues from the Health Connector and the Group Insurance Commission around state agency action on this front. There are a number of initiatives underway, notably the Supporting Mass Health and their work implementing the hospital incentive, the equity incentive program that was negotiated as part of the most recent 1115 waiver. So we are working with hospitals and Mass Health to collect the RELD-SOGI data from hospitals directly from the EHRs to help inform and really with the implementation of that program. So that work is well underway. We have a number of other equity-centric analyses, reports, briefs that are forthcoming. They've listed here. If you want more information, we'd be happy to set up some additional time with you all to kind of do a deeper dive into our health equity work. But if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide, I think the ask at a future council meeting where we will do a deep dive on equity is really around, as we think about a more comprehensive and cohesive health equity strategy. And for CHIA's role, I at this health equity summit where there was a number of industry leaders coming together to tackle this issue. The foundation of data and that notion that data is critical to supporting any of this work was very much a recurrent theme throughout the day. And so as CHIA, yes, we have all this great work underway, but it is somewhat disparate. And so I think over the next couple of months, we want to start putting together a more cohesive, comprehensive strategy of what that data collection looks like and how can we support all the other ongoing efforts through our centralized data collection and data asset resources. So more to come on that, but I think where it would be really helpful to get feedback from the council at a later meeting is around the development and our approach to that broader strategy. So next slide, workforce, obviously another really paramount issue. Anytime we talk about healthcare, the issue of workforce comes up. I'm excited to announce or share with this group that we've fielded the first cohort of the workforce survey. I think that was at the end of last month or the beginning of this month. We're still in June. And we are expecting to have results and readout from that survey, I believe, early September timeframe. And so what we will certainly be coming back to the council, looking for your input and feedback on is what is the best way to share that information, put that information, because we are collecting a lot of really valuable data from these providers around vacancy rates, turnover rates, recruitment, retention strategies. And so knowing that we're going to be sitting on a lot of really informative data, what is the best way to put it out into the world? And so we will come with some options to consider, but that is another area for discussion that I wanted to tee up today. But again, for a future discussion, and we'll have a little bit more insight into what the data is looking like at that next council meeting. So look forward to that conversation. All right, so again, apologies that we had to breeze through this section because there's a lot of really important work being done, but we won't be able to do a deep dive in each of these council meetings, unfortunately. So with that, I wanted to make sure that we had some time to just provide an update on our EAPCD project. Given that there's been a lot of progress to date since we last met, but there are, spoiler alert, there are still some challenges that remain that we're working through with IBM. I'll turn it over to Jamie Reed, who, as you may recall from the last meeting, I've sort of deputized and established as our point person on this project to make sure that we are moving this forward in a really coordinated and rigorous fashion, working with IBM. So, Jamie, you want to take it from here?
Everybody, we can bring up the first slide. Yeah. So closing out the development phase, the activity we had gone through in the spring was to create a final list of items that needed to be completed for us to conclude the development phase. This included things like improving our Tableau and Oracle performance, normal quarterly data processing, and our final documentation for our end users. Since the last update, a lot of things have occurred in order to improve the performance. So we've had some movement there. We are submitting and processing data quarterly. And we've also received draft copies of much of the documentation that we've been working on. And we're currently working through drafts of that now. And then the last point is that we're starting to begin our contract renegotiations with IBM that will transition us into the operating phase. Next slide. So some of the things that we have done since we last spoke, the improved system performance. We've made several changes to the Tableau and Oracle performance, including physicalizing some tables that has helped to enable faster query returns. And we know that the system performance improvements will be an ongoing activity. So we have continued to work with IBM to figure out where there are problem areas, where they can tweak it, and we've been seeing improvements over time. Quarterly data processing. I think the last time we met, we had just done our first, what would be dubbed as the quarterly data processing. So now we're in kind of our second run of that. So we've got that nice cadence going. The current focus now is during that processing time, we lose access to the system for a little while. So we're trying to figure out ways to shorten that time frame and kind of do things in parallel so that the system doesn't have that long of an outage. So that's a current effort. And then reviewing the documentation, as I stated, we've received some draft copies of our documentation deliverables, which we feel are one of the most critical pieces of this puzzle, because if the documentation for the end users, isn't useful to them, we don't see this as, being able to have as many people using it. So we're really putting a lot of time and effort into making sure that documentation looks great. We're currently reviewing drafts of documents that have to do, for the user community, including data dictionaries, user guides for Tableau and Oracle, and analytic enhancement guides. So it's kind of walking them through the system, how to get to it, how to use it, what's in there, that sort of thing. As you know, we've got HPC that we've been working with to get them on board, and we are we have a few people that are actively using it. They're seeing positive results, and we're working now with the AGO to start figuring out what we need to do to onboard some of their team. Next slide. The BI tool. So last time we talked a bit about Tableau and some of the performance issues that we were having. The improvements that they've made thus far, they've kind of created a team that was working on ways to improve the system. And there has definitely been a better response for some of these simple queries. We're having better performance, but we're still trying to figure out if the functionality will be good for a larger user population, and if any of those latency issues will become a problem again for more complex queries. So we're working through some of those issues. IBM has also decided to, while they're exhausting their Tableau improvement options, they've decided to start investigating some other tools and options to see if we would get a better performance. And so they're continuing to work with us on Tableau, but they're also starting to create a proof of technology for Cognos to see if we would find a better experience with that, because they want to make sure that as we're adding users and creating more complex queries and having more ad hoc type reporting, that we're able to get the performance at the best level possible. Next slide. So for our current contract expires next March. So we have kicked off the process to start negotiating that new contract. So we've been working very hard internally to create a request for proposal. So we've just kind of gone through what we've learned, what we know, and what we'll need going forward. And that renewal will be for 3 years. So our intention is, once we've completed our draft proposal, we're going to send it off to IBM and give them about a 45-day window to review and kick back a proposal for us. And then we'll, negotiate back and forth. So we're leaving ourselves a long window of time to kind of fine tune all the things that we want in this new contract that will, kind of be the operational phase. Our negotiation emphasis is going to be on active performance monitoring and improvement, and then the continuous improvement of our analytic capabilities. So we want to make sure that this contract lays out that we're going to just continue to build off all the progress we've made and all the capabilities of the system. I think that's the last slide. So.
A topic that deserves more input. You've got some great members on this council who know a lot about this. Feel free to reach out over the next couple of months as you are working on this. I know we're going to not have a conversation because we need to get the executive director's report very quickly, but it is not for lack of interest.
Understood.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. And as stated, please feel free if there's any questions or you want to follow up offline, happy to discuss sort of where we are with the project, both closing out the development phase, but also as we head into the operating phase and contract negotiations. Happy to discuss more. All right. On the executive director's report, two key agenda items. One is just to go through a brief budget and legislative update. So I'll turn it over to Emma. And then following that, we'll on deck is a follow-up item from the last meeting around AI, which I think can be pretty quick. So Emma, do you want to just give the 30-second update on where we are?
Yes, thanks, Lauren. So an update on the FY24 budget process. So both the House and Senate have released their budget proposals, and they both included CHIA's requested appropriation, which would fully fund the agency for the next fiscal year. The next step in this process is that a conference committee has been appointed in early June, and it's their task to reconcile the different proposals. And then in terms of a legislative update, so bill hearings have been picking up steam. So we're keeping tabs on those hearings and progress of kind of any and all healthcare bills, obviously with special attention to the bills that would include new directives for CHIA. Was that fast enough, Lauren?
Good. Lauren, you're on.
Perfect. Thank you, Emma. So just one follow-up item from the last meeting. I know that Laura, you had asked about whether to what extent CHIA had been thinking about and incorporating AI into our data and analytics capacity. And I think the short answer, as we think about AI, there's sort of two ways we're thinking about it. One, to the extent that we're integrating it and incorporating it into our own workflows and data operations. I think the answer there is that it is still too soon. It's something that we're monitoring and looking at. We don't have sort of a recommendation, but that is one of the milestones and tactics within our strategic plan, which is to really do an evaluation and come up with a recommendation about opportunities. The second sort of piece of the AI is we know that the use of AI has really taken hold in the healthcare space with a number of different use cases. We did a brief scan and inventory of what those are and summarize some of the use cases. This is not intended to be exhaustive. I think this is something that to the extent that it needs to be sort of acknowledged or recognized in our work. We certainly are monitoring the AI and its proliferation in the healthcare space. But at this juncture, we are still sort of in the monitoring phase, and we'll continue to keep an eye on it as it again evolves at lightning speed.
Again, not the last word, I'm sure, on AI.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. First, thank you to everybody. I'm sorry for my poor time management on this. At the next meeting, we are going to have, it sounds like, continuation of the conversation on the strategic plan, deeper dive into health equity and workforce, so be prepared for that. And again, leave any suggestions that you have in advance or thoughts. You don't have to stay silent for 2 months and wait for the meeting. I'm sure we'll have an update on the APCD, and we'll try to talk a little bit more about where we are. It's a major investment, and you're now at a critical moment. And when Lauren, whenever you say something like we have concerns, then my ears perk up. So we'll go into that in greater detail. And again, I think we'll talk about AI. Excellent meeting. Thank you for all your contribution. One last question. Zoom or integrated? I mean, we're such a great group. Don't you want to be in person every now and then?
Zoom. I'm good with Zoom.
I knew you'd say that, Bill. I should have muted you. All right, you can all weigh in. Let Lauren know what you think. It's 4 o'clock. Everybody has to leave.
And
Bye.
Bill, I'll follow up
Thank
with
you.
your questions.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job. Really good work.
Thanks.